I didn't set out to disappoint my father. I just didn't want to live someone else's idea of success. From the time I could speak in full sentences, my life was penciled in, not by me, but by my father, Raymond Rhodes. He ran one of the largest independent wealth management firms in Manhattan, and he always said he was building it for the family. Except the family really meant my younger brother Owen. I was expected to be the polished Rhodes' daughter. The one who smiled, dressed right, didn't argue in public, and got a respectable law degree so she could help with client contracts and eventually marry some clean-cut Harvard guy who could be absorbed into the family brand. I played the part for a while, went to Columbia, graduated with honors, even interned at Dad's firm for a summer. But the truth was, I hated every second of it. I hated the coldness of the boardroom, the fake laughter at charity galas, the way my father shook hands with people he insulted behind closed doors. And worst of all, I hated the way I disappeared in my own story. It started with an idea. I couldn't shake a digital platform for mental health triage, something that could connect people to urgent help when they're spiraling confused or ashamed to ask. I pitched it to one of my professors, then to a friend in tech, then to myself in the mirror 100 times. It wasn't perfect, but it mattered. So I turned down a full-time offer at my dad's firm, took my savings and started building it. I still remember the night I told him. It was just us at a steakhouse he frequented with clients. The same table, same leather booth. He didn't even look up from his scotch when I said, "Dad, I'm launching a startup. It's in health tech, specifically mental health." He stared at me, then laughed. Not a warm laugh, the kind you give a child who says they want to be an astronaut. "A startup, in therapy apps." "You're joking." "No," I said quietly. "I'm serious." "Natalie, you're 27. You've got a JD from Columbia and a straight path into a 7-figure future. And you want to build an app for sad people." I didn't answer. He leaned back, folded his arms. "You're wasting your time. And mine." I thought he'd cool off, that he'd come around eventually, that once he saw me working 12-hour days, pulling together my first round of funding, he'd see I wasn't playing games. But he didn't. Instead, he doubled down. He stopped inviting me to firm events. Told Owen to take over her spot at the table. He told family friends I was exploring some side project, as if I were on a mental health sabbatical rather than running a company. The final blow came on my birthday. My mother, always careful to stay neutral, handed me a small white envelope with trembling fingers. I opened it thinking it was a check or a card. It was a formal letter. From the Rhodes Family Trust. Effective immediately, Natalie Rhodes is removed as beneficiary of all discretionary disbursements until further notice. No warning, no explanation, just exile. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio apartment because I couldn't afford a real office yet, and cried for the first time since college. Not because I lost the money, but because I realized something far worse. I was never going to be enough for him. Not unless I became someone else. And I was done auditioning for a role I never wanted. After that letter, something inside me flipped. It wasn't rage, not at first. It was this quiet, still sort of resolve. The kind you feel when the fire alarms finally stop ringing and all you're left with is smoke and silence and the choice to start sweeping up the ashes or just walk away. I chose to build. The first 6 months were brutal. No safety net, no family checks, no backup plan. I lived on cheap ramen and lukewarm optimism, pitching my app called Havenline to investors who smiled politely and passed. Over and over. Mental health's not scalable. How do you monetize crisis? Is this a charity or a business? I'd walk out of meetings with shaking hands and a fake smile, then cry in the back of an Uber while updating spreadsheets on my phone. I'd stare at Instagram stories of Owen in Turks and Caicos, clinking glasses with our dad captioned "Legacy in Motion." Meanwhile, I was Googling how to code my own notification system, because I couldn't afford another developer. But every night, even on the worst ones, I remembered what he said. An app for sad people. Those words kept echoing, not as shame, but as fuel. I launched the MVP of Havenline 14 months later. It was glitchy, imperfect, and a logistical nightmare. But it worked. A user could log in during a panic attack, press one button, and get routed to a live professional or text support within 30 seconds. The algorithm matched urgency with region insurance access and language preference. We hit 10,000 users in the first month. By the third month, we were featured in a write-up by a mid-sized tech blog. That led to our first real funding round, $500K, from a socially minded VC firm that had passed on me a year earlier. And just like that, people started answering my calls. I got a call from my mom too. She didn't mention the trust, didn't ask how I was doing, just said, "Your father saw the article. He said it's interesting that even your kind of business can get funding now. Even your kind of business." Like I was running a side hustle selling crystals from the back of a van. I hung up before she could finish. And I cried not because it hurt, but because I realized that day something painful and freeing. They weren't going to change, but I didn't need them to anymore. 2 years after the launch, Havenline hit 1 million users. We had partnerships with 2 insurance networks and 3 city governments. I was invited to speak at a healthcare innovation summit alongside women I'd idolized since undergrad. And for the first time in my life, I stood in a room full of power and didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit in. No one there cared about my last name. No one asked about the family trust. They asked about impact, outcomes, change. And I finally understood something that I think every disowned daughter has to learn on her own. You can lose the inheritance and still build an empire. My father still never acknowledged it. He never reached out, never apologized. But I heard through a cousin that he told a colleague at some charity dinner. "She's doing all right, still not real business. But at least she's not on the streets." That was the closest thing I ever got to approval. And strangely, I didn't need it anymore. Because somewhere between being cut out of the will and writing my own pitch decks at 2 a.m., I stopped building to prove him wrong, and started building because I believed in me. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was between investor meetings, sipping lukewarm coffee, and scrolling through a product roadmap on my laptop, when my phone lit up with an unknown number from Greenwich. I answered out of habit. "Ms. Rhodes, this is Alan Friedman. I'm the estate attorney for your father's firm. I regret to inform you that Mr. Raymond Rhodes passed away last night." I didn't speak, not because I was in shock, but because I didn't know how to feel. Some part of me had imagined we'd get time for a conversation, time for something, closure, apology, confrontation, anything. Instead, I got a voicemail from a lawyer. He died in his sleep. Massive cardiac arrest. No warning. Owen found him early in the morning, still clutching his phone on the nightstand. My first thought, the one I'm not proud of, was, did he call me before he went? He didn't. The funeral was planned in 3 days. I found out through a mutual connection one of his former assistants tagged an RSVP link on LinkedIn. No one called me. No one asked if I'd like to speak. There wasn't even a seat saved in the family section. I showed up anyway. Black dress, minimal makeup. My hair pulled tight like armor. Owen saw me from across the room and had the decency to look surprised. My mother did not. She walked over as if she were greeting an unwanted guest. "Natalie," she said tightly. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't come for him," I said. "I came for me." She flinched, and I realized then she was grieving the only person who ever made decisions in her world. Without him, she didn't know who to be. The service was stiff and corporate, just like him. Suits, Rolexes, men with voices full of fake reverence and hollow respect. No one mentioned me. It was as if I had never existed. I sat in the 3rd row, hands folded, watching a slideshow that included baby pictures of Owen family vacations and graduation photos, none of mine. It was the kind of erasure so subtle, so intentional, it made my lungs hurt. 3 days later, I got another call from Alan Friedman. "Apologies, Ms. Rhodes, but you weren't included in the will reading. Your father left explicit instructions." I wasn't shocked, but hearing it out loud hit differently. What did he leave me? Silence. Ms. Rhodes? Nothing. He stated, and I quote, "no interest in legacy dilution through non-compliant ventures." Legacy, dilution. He talked about me like a stock option. Owen, of course, got everything. The firm, the properties, the trust, the vacation homes, even my grandfather's cufflinks. My father left my mother a structured allowance managed by Owen. I got nothing but a line in a legal document that defined me by what I wasn't. I could have fought it, but I didn't, because by then I already had more than they could take. I had a company valued at $18 million. I had a team that saw me. I had clients who wrote to say Havenline saved their lives. And most importantly, I had myself intact, unfiltered, and no longer seeking their permission. I used to think loss would break me, but I learned something instead. You don't always have to win the will to inherit freedom. And sometimes being disinherited is the exact beginning you need to start living unowned. After the will was read, there was nothing left to be angry about. The rejection was complete, perfectly executed, legally airtight, emotionally final. It should have devastated me, but strangely I felt light. Like the invisible leash I'd worn my whole life had finally snapped. There was nothing else to earn, nothing left to prove, no dinner invitation I was waiting for, no backhanded compliment I was praying to hear. He erased me from the ledger, but in doing so, he also freed me from the debt. I took a week off after the funeral. No calls, no emails, just solitude in a cabin outside Asheville with a battered journal, hot coffee, and a Spotify playlist full of piano instrumentals. I wrote for hours. Not about the company, not about him, about me. Who I was before their definitions started sculpting me into someone digestible. Who I could be without legacy breathing down my neck like a silent obligation. By the time I returned to New York, I had made a decision. I was going to launch the Rhodes Initiative. Yes, I kept the name. Because he may have tried to erase me from the Rhodes Empire. But I am a Rhodes. And now the name would mean something else. The Rhodes Initiative would fund female-led tech startups in underrepresented communities, especially in mental health, wellness, and education. We wouldn't be about performance. We'd be about purpose. We wouldn't ask founders if their idea was respectable. We'd ask if it was real. I funneled $2 million from my last round into the seed of the project. When TechCrunch covered it, they titled the article "Disinherited Daughter Builds Her Own Empire and Brings Others with Her." I didn't ask for that headline, but I didn't correct it either, because it was true. The irony. After the article, people from my father's circle started reaching out. Old partners, board members, even a man who once told me mental health isn't a market, it's a liability, offered to connect me with his private equity firm. I said no, every time. Not out of pettiness, but because I'd finally learned that proximity to power isn't the same as owning your own. One evening, I walked past the old Rhodes building downtown. They'd replaced the signage with Owen's rebranded firm, Rhodes Capital Advisory, all blue tones and sharp corners, like the office itself was wearing a suit. I stood across the street for a moment, watching the glass glint under the city lights. It didn't feel like a missed opportunity. It felt like a museum exhibit. A life I was once told I should want, but never did. I started to walk away, then paused. There, etched on the side wall in small lettering, was my grandfather's quote. "Leave behind more than money. Leave behind meaning." I smiled, because my father had missed the meaning entirely. But I hadn't. I was living it. I was building it, every single day. I didn't expect them to come back. And when they did, it wasn't with flowers or apologies. It was with numbers. Panic, and a half-scripted plea hidden beneath the language of family. It started with a voicemail from Owen. "Hey Nat, it's been a while. Hope things are good. I was wondering if you had time to talk about something. Something strategic. Call me. Strategic." That was always the code. The way our family wrapped need in a business suit and tried to pass it off as formality. I didn't call back. 3 days later, I got a message from my mother. She hadn't spoken to me directly since the funeral. Now she sounded tired. "Sweetheart, your brother's under a lot of stress. The firm is going through some restructuring. He could use your insight, maybe even your stability. Please call." Insight. Stability. Still no mention of what they'd taken. Still no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Eventually, I agreed to meet Owen. Not because I owed him, but because I was curious. We sat at a sleek cafe in Midtown, one of those places where espresso costs more than my first laptop. He looked older, thinner, more fidgety than I remembered. He barely made it through pleasantries before launching in. "We're in trouble," he admitted. 3 major clients pulled out. There's an SEC review pending. And I don't have the kind of voice you do in public. They trust you. You've built something credible." He looked down. "We need help." It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. But it still wasn't an apology, just a transaction. A pitch without paperwork. I stirred my tea. "What are you asking Owen?" "A bridge loan. Maybe a short-term advisory title. It would look good. Set the tone. Show that Rhodes still sticks together." I almost laughed. Sticks together. "You erased me. Owen, our father buried me while he was still alive. He said nothing. So I continued. You don't want my guidance. You want my name, my reputation. You want to borrow the credibility I built after you and Dad tried to burn it. He rubbed his jaw. We were just following Dad's wishes. And now you want me to fix the damage he left behind? His silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up. No. He looked stunned. No, that's right. No money, no partnership, no title, not even a quote for your press release. I pulled my coat over my shoulders. You didn't want me when I was building something real. Don't come crawling now that the fake is collapsing. I left him sitting there, mouth half open, heart not broken, just exposed. And for the first time since childhood, I walked away from my family not feeling like I'd abandoned them, but like I'd finally stopped abandoning myself. The funny thing is, I wasn't angry. Not really. Because by then I understood. When you stop trying to belong in a room that was never built for you, you stop mistaking survival for loyalty. And you start choosing peace over performance. Every time. It's strange how quiet peace is. After all the years of tension, the unspoken expectations, the passive-aggressive jabs, the desperate need to be accepted, I thought it would feel louder, more triumphant. But it doesn't. It feels like morning light through windows you chose for yourself. Like answering only to your own reflection. Like waking up and realizing you no longer have to prove that you matter. You just do. The Rhodes building shut down a few months later. Owen sold it off quietly, blaming economic shifts and overextension. I read the headlines while drinking coffee from a chipped mug in my Brooklyn kitchen, one I bought from a thrift store the week I launched Havenline. No sadness, just symmetry. I visited my father's grave once. Only once. Not because I needed him to hear me. He never really listened while alive, but because I needed to speak. I brought a single white rose and knelt beside the marble headstone. You didn't ruin me, I said softly. You tried, but you failed. You taught me power was control, but I learned it was choice. You taught me loyalty meant obedience, but I found it meant self-respect. I touched the stone not to feel closer, but to mark the boundary between his legacy and mine. Then I stood up and left without looking back. My mother emails occasionally. Short notes. No real substance. I think she wants a relationship, but doesn't know how to exist outside his orbit. I've stopped trying to fix that. Because not everyone is meant to follow you into your healing. Some are just chapters you reread when you forget how far you've come. Havenline is thriving. We've helped over 5 million people connect with the support they needed at their lowest points. We fund scholarships now. Partner with universities. Just signed a deal with the Department of Health in 3 states. But the proudest moment, a handwritten letter from a 19-year-old girl who said our app kept her alive on a night she had no one else to call. She didn't know my name. She didn't know my story. She just said, "Whoever built this, thank you. You gave me back my future." And I sat there for a long time holding that letter. Because in the end, that's the only inheritance I ever wanted to pass down, a life that gave someone else permission to keep going. I was never the failure. I was just the first to break free. And now I live in a home I bought with money I earned from work I believe in. I wake up knowing I don't belong to anyone's script, but my own. And sometimes when I pass a mirror, I smile, not because I'm proud of how far I've come, but because I like who's finally looking back. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd said yes. If I had walked the path my father paved, smiled at the right parties, married someone from the same tax bracket, and signed contracts in his name rather than mine. Would I have felt more loved? Would he have been proud? The truth, maybe. But I would have been a ghost in my own life. Applauded, well-dressed, but hollow. And I would have spent decades sitting at a table where everyone called it family, but no one ever asked how I was really doing. I think back to the younger version of me, the girl sitting alone in her studio apartment trying to code a crisis hotline feature with YouTube tutorials and a dollar store notebook. She had no idea where this would go. No idea she'd one day be invited to keynote conferences or sit on advisory boards alongside people who'd once dismissed her. She didn't even know if the app would survive 6 months. But she showed up. Not for approval, not for applause, but because something inside her whispered, if no one builds this, who will? And she listened. When people ask me now what success feels like, I don't talk about numbers or equity or TED Talks. I talk about the morning silence I enjoy when I light a candle and sit beside my sunlit window. I talk about the freedom to say no without guilt. I talk about never needing to perform pain to earn empathy. Because real success, the kind they don't teach in business school, is when you finally stop hustling for a seat at a table that makes you shrink, and you build your own, even if it's just a corner desk in a one-bedroom apartment at first. I'll never get the apology I once cried for. There will never be a letter from my father admitting he was wrong. But I've learned something more important than forgiveness. I don't need closure from someone who only ever opened doors to control me. Closure doesn't come from others. It comes from walking away and no longer checking over your shoulder. So here I am, 34 years old, no inheritance, no family crest on my wall, no trust fund, just a company I believe in, a team I love, a peace I earned, and a name that once tried to bury me, now written on every door I opened myself. Natalie Rhodes, not legacy's shadow, not someone's obedient daughter, just me, fully, finally, free.